The church realizes that human sexuality is much more than a biological urge. It's our body and soul expressing a wonderful sign of love. And when it's done in that context, it's beautiful because it's an image of God's love.
Welcome to Matters of Soul Importance, where we dive deeply into topics of both earthly and eternal consequence. I'm Roxanne Solonen, faith columnist and features writer for the Forum, author, and speaker. I first met my guest today, Tim Mosier, in church. We did music ministry together for years and still do on occasion through a contemporary worship group that Tim started. We've crossed paths also in the realms of being Catholic radio hosts and fellow faith speakers. Along with being an accomplished musician and composer, Tim also worked for years as a head girls volleyball coach for Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota, and, more to the point of our topic, is a student of the Pope John Paul II's teaching on sexuality, otherwise known as theology of the body. Did I mention he has a heart for bringing the gift of music to the elderly, and that he's currently training to become a deacon as well? Tim and his wife, Veronica, a native of South Africa, also have been foster parents and are the adoptive parents of Romeo. There's a lot to this guy, Tim, but for today's purposes, we're going to mainly zero in on his hat as a speaker and learner of the church's teaching on sexuality, very likely one of the most widely misunderstood tenets of the Christian faith. We can't go anywhere, it seems, without confronting the sexualization of our culture and the belief that Christians are way too uptight about the topic. But is this the truth? Jesus called himself the way, the truth, and the life, and said that the truth will set us free. So prepare to be maybe surprised and certainly freed by this discussion. With that, let's head in to the heart of the interview. Welcome, Tim, to Matters of Soul Importance. I'm so glad you're here this morning. And I have to say, of all my guests, I always like to have like a personal connection with my guests. And I think I've known you the longest of any of my guests. I was thinking about that. Like, we kind of go back a ways.
Since I was about 6. Well, maybe not that long, but we do go back many years.
I don't know. I think it started at church, probably. We attend the same parish, and then probably Catholic radio maybe next. I'm not sure. We both started hosting for that at some point. I started, I think, in 2011 or 2010, back when it was in the Moorhead studio and without windows.
I started in 2007, 2008.
Oh, wow. So you beat me out. Yes. Yeah. I was invited to be a guest up there, and that's kind of when it all started. But anyway, well, we're going to start kind of at the beginning here. I just want to hear, I was thinking, I don't know about little Tim. I don't know. I don't know a lot about, like, I know you have a brother, but I don't know if you have other siblings. Where were you in the birth order? And Tell me about the little Tim.
You betcha. So I grew up second oldest of 7 kids, a farm family up in northwestern North Dakota. We were a very religious family, a Catholic family, went to Mass every Sunday and more. We were farmers and we were musicians. And so my life has been a lot of music, and a lot about God, and then a lot about farming. So those are kind of the 3 things: God, farming, and music. And it was great. It's a wonderful upbringing. I had a very stable upbringing. I'm very blessed. My parents had an amazing marriage. Never heard either one of them raise their voice at each other as long as I lived. Never once. It was an amazing relationship. Not that they disagreed, but they loved each other. And they really gave me a great example of what it means to love, what it means to deal with a person. And that was so important. I didn't realize it at the time, but it really prepared me for this beautiful, beautiful teaching of St. John Paul II, because I can go back to that and say, even in the midst of difficulties, they were still loving each other and treating each other as persons. So I came down to NDSU then for my undergrad and graduate.
Before you go on.
Oh, yes.
I'm stuck.
Okay. Yeah.
Siblings, birth order, how many kids?
I'm second oldest to 7. Yeah.
Okay, good.
3 brothers and 3 sisters. Yeah.
Okay, so you have a little bit of that leadership quality, but then there was someone that, what is
Jim.
Okay.
Jim is my older, you probably don't know him.
Okay.
Yeah, he's my older brother. So.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
all right, now you're off to NDSU.
Off to NDSU. I never lose my faith. I'm tied into the Newman Center, but I would have to say that I maybe didn't live my faith, as vibrantly as I could have in that situation. And tried a few different things that people do at college. Never anything really crazy. But again, this ties into John Paul II because my personal experience is that I'm looking for happiness. Everyone's looking for happiness and satisfaction and all those things. And it's like, I realized that some of the things that people were, saying are going to make you happy, I didn't experience that. And quite honestly, when they looked at it, they really didn't experience a lasting happiness at all either. And so my faith strengthened then, and I, really stayed close to the church. And then as I got going, right as I was graduating, I just got this idea that God was calling me to something more, to be an evangelist. And so in my mid-20s, so that's been about 40 years now, I became a lay evangelist. And one of my main people was St. John Paul II. And it was just amazing. So from the Bible, learned St. John Paul II, and I've been sharing this truth ever since, through music, through message, all these type of things.
So that wasn't your job or your career, right?
No, that's true. My career was, I was a teacher. I had a math degree and an education master's. And so I taught and coached volleyball at NDSU for a few years and then Concordia for 27 years. So outside of all that, I was a lay evangelist besides my teaching and coaching job.
What did that look like, lay evangelist? Help us understand, exactly.
Sure. Exactly. So an evangelist is someone who brings the good news, right, to someone. So basically what I would do, as you can tell, I have a very outgoing personality. And what I saw, especially at the college, because I taught at college for over 30 years, I saw the ache and the desires of these people. They want happiness. They're looking, they're searching. And supposedly they have it all. They're young, they're beautiful. They have access to other people, to parties, to all these things, right? And yet they're still coming to me saying, I'm not happy. I saw it in my players. And I would tell them, I say, volleyball is not going to be the be all end all. Volleyball is only a tool to become a better person through all these things that we do, right? Through sacrifice, through common effort, through relationships, all these things. And so what I saw, what they were missing, of course, they were missing Jesus. Because you see, whether people realize it or not, we're made by God and we're made for God. He is our beginning. He is our end. And all these things in between, they're not bad in and of themselves. A good relationship, a great steak, a drink of wine with a friend, that's wonderful. But if we hang our hat on full and complete satisfaction and fulfillment with an experience or another person, you and I are both married, Roxanne. If you were to put your total, Troy, your husband, you have to totally fulfill me, everything. Well, you'd be sad and frustrated because he can't do that, nor can you do that for him. But it's a great sign. So what we're going to talk about today, Roxanne, I love this, is how all these good things on earth, when used well, are signs that point us to our ultimate goal, our ultimate freedom, our ultimate happiness, which is union with God.
I did mess up in the beginning and thought that Troy was going to be everything to me. And
most people do.
It caused a lot of angst and a lot of suffering. And wow, what a journey to come out of that one and go, God is the only one that's going to really fulfill all my needs and desires. But we have a skewed idea of that. The question today, sometimes I miss repeating that, even though it's going to be obvious, but does the church hate sex? Now, I know it's kind of provocative, but it's a true thing floating around out there. Sure. And so I wanted to have you in here. I knew that you would do a good job of kind of parsing through that question and getting to the heart of it.
Sure.
So I'm just going to ask.
Yeah.
Does the church hate sex?
If you were to ask the culture, they'd say, yes, end of story, let's go have supper. Okay, right? However, the church does not hate sex. The church realizes and sees the full view of what I'm calling this human sexuality is, Roxanne. Okay? And interestingly enough, for many, many years, for almost 2,000 years, most of the culture, especially Christian culture of any kind, said yes to what the Catholic Church is teaching. I'll get more into that later. So what's my point? The church does not hate sex. The church realizes that human sexuality is much more than a biological urge. It's our body and soul expressing a wonderful sign of love. And when it's done in that context, it's beautiful because it's an image of God's love. And that, I can tell you from my own experience, Roxanne, having experienced, yes, some of the other, the non-marital type things. I'll admit it. Yes, that. And what happened? I was never really satisfied. Oh, sure, there was momentary pleasure, momentary, hey, this is kind of a little high. But then we needed a new experience, a different experience. It was the pleasure principle, Roxanne, instead of the person principle. And that the church understands people are always to be loved, never to be used. They are persons. When it comes to human sexuality, it's the greatest gift God has given us. Why? Because through this co-creation, this cooperation of husband and wife, and I'll tell you why that's important in a second, but through this cooperation, we get to co-create a new human person. Greatest creation of all. God's given us that power through cooperation, but it has to be done in a special way because children need love. Everyone needs to be loved. What's the only acceptable then place for this to happen? With a husband and a wife. Of course, it has to be a man and a woman. Why a husband and a wife? Because they've sworn a commitment to each other till death do us part, through the help of God, so help me God. And they've sworn, at least in the Catholic Church, that they will accept children lovingly. That doesn't mean that every sexual act has to have a child, and it doesn't. The church doesn't teach we have to have as many children as is biologically possible, as many children as God is calling to you, the way that He intended, which we can get into later with contraception if you want.
I want to come back to, because I was thinking the same thing about how the church, like when we marry, we have to actually state that we will welcome children.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was really strange when I was younger and didn't really understand it, even when I was getting married. But before we even go that, you said, why a woman and a man? Well, one of my immediate thoughts was because that's the only way children come into the world. Like everyone on this earth right now came into this world through a woman and a man. That's how it happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is true. So with much of what we're going to talk about today, Roxanne, we can even talk about scientific biological facts. Let's take that point you talked about. It's the only way they come. And that's so true, right? That's the way God intended. Think about your body, Roxanne, and any person's body. Listeners out there, think about your body. You're complete in all your systems, your circulatory system, your digestive system, respiratory system, right? All these systems. You're complete in and of yourself, except for one. That's your reproductive system. It doesn't make sense by itself. You are made for another, okay? And clearly, the male, female. Now, let's look at the sexual act itself. Can we go there for a minute?
Absolutely.
Okay, so again, I always like to acknowledge those of you out there who think, okay, this guy is crazy. What's he talking about? Let me speak to you for a minute. Sex feels good. Yeah, it does. And it's supposed to. Oh, okay, good. But let me tell you, there's two aspects to sex, to human sexuality. Okay? I call it bonding and babies, love and life. Okay? The church has called it unitive and procreative. Okay? Why is this important? Because as humans, we're not animals. We can choose right around. That's why we don't spay and neuter humans. That's why we spay and neuter dogs. They can't say no. We can say yes, we can say no. But human sexuality, I see we're body, soul unity, right? And so, yes, the human sexuality is there to co-create new children, as you mentioned. Very good. Propagate the species. If it didn't happen, we wouldn't be here, right?
Nope.
But it's also to unify the couple. Our listeners, some of them know this, some of them maybe don't. At the moment of orgasm in a man and a woman, there is an explosion of hormones and chemicals in our body. You know what it does? It links us so tightly, laser tight to this experience. Whatever this is what I am going to seek in future sexual encounters. If it's pornography, for instance, what happens? Okay, that felt good. That's right. But what happens? Now it has to be more and more intense for us to get the same pleasure because we're following a pleasure principle and not really uniting myself with someone. I call this, it's not a communion of persons, it's a joining of bodies.
Right, and then they become an object then.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
They're an object for my gratification. I also actually make myself an object. Mm-hmm. Okay? And then what happens? Well, we get more and more intense. Time magazine a few years ago did a story on this. Young men in their 20s and early 30s. Their problem? They could not perform sexually with their wife or their girlfriend. Why not? Because they had been addicted to pornography and their body And everything about them was so conditioned only to react to this, that when the living person in front of them, who they said they loved, they could no longer perform sexually because of what pornography had done to them.
That's so sad.
Yes.
One of the points I wanted to bring up, you hear along with the question, well, does the church hate sex? The church is always like involved. They're always getting their, noses into into my bedroom. But as you're talking about it, it makes sense because it's such a precious, sacred reality that it's really to safeguard this tremendous gift of co-creation.
That's exactly right, Roxanne. And that's such a good way to put it. I like to put it this way. Let's say we're playing in a yard. My son's playing in the yard, all right? Now, I don't let him go outside the fence. He might want to, but it's for his own safety, his own good. He has a lot of freedom in there, a lot of freedom. I just asked for one or two things. Go back to the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve had all the freedom they wanted. One restriction. Of course, they stepped over the line, and here we are. But that's what I'm saying. So what the church says with sexuality is, this is a safe place when you follow what's going on. Look at anything we do. Look at music. It's a safe place when you're singing the notes you're supposed to in a choir. It's a safe place in the game of basketball when I'm dribbling, when I'm running with the ball. You see, if I try to exercise my individual freedom, quote unquote, by stepping out of this line, out of this safety zone, I hurt myself, I hurt others. Getting back to human sexuality then. Because it is such a sacred place, it involves the whole totality of the human person, the whole totality of another human person, and the possibility of a third. We have 3 people involved in this, Roxanne, and it's a delicate balance to make sure it's always a loving act. And this is the key. So why does the church keep your nose out of the bedroom? Because the church loves you, and the church says, when this is done as it should be, as the nature of the human person is, it's wonderful, it's beautiful. But it's too easy to go off the rails, to go outside, because if I'm by myself, say pornography, then I just get into myself. Okay, many people have been there. I struggled with that 25, 30 years ago. I get it. It's terrible. It was very difficult to get out of. One of the most difficult things I've ever did. Praise be to God. 15, 20 years ago or so, he gave me the victory over that. 2 people, though. Even 2 people, if all they are is focused on themselves, for instance, we're not going to have any children, right? We talked about Catholic Church has children. If they say they're not going to have children, for whatever reason, now their sexuality becomes focused only on each other and their pleasure. Introduce a third. When I look at my wife and she looks at me and says, I so love you, and you so love me that I'm willing to give my totality to you, everything, including my fertility. And then we may have a third, and that's okay. We welcome that third because this is the loving fruit of this act. It doesn't spring from something outside of our marriage. This child springs from the love that we have sworn to each other and God. And it's a beautiful fruit of that. Why is the church, quote unquote, in the bedroom then? To make sure that all people are loved, and not that the sex feels good, but that is fulfilling, and it really is doing what it's supposed to do, which is giving us the peace and the joy that comes from the total gift of ourself and the total reception of another and a third.
So I want to come back to the question because, again, when I married Troy in 1991, I did think it was a little strange that the church had us speak about having children. I thought, okay, well, I'll say that. And yeah, I want that. I always did want children, and so did Troy. But it's just a little weird that we're speaking that here in front of everyone. Can you explain? You're a deacon in training.
Sure.
And so even before that, I'm sure you had some thoughts about this. What would you say to people that say, well, maybe I don't want kids or whatever?
Sure.
Why is marriage and children tied?
That's so good. There's 3 things that we have to keep together: marriage, sex, and babies. Did you ever have your hair braided when you were young, Roxanne, or braid someone else's hair?
Yeah.
When you're braiding someone's hair, how many strands of hair do you put together? 3. Yeah, in the normal braid, right?
Right.
Exactly. And so you take this braid, 3 strands, and you braid it. It makes a nice, strong braid, doesn't it? And that's, again, for thousands of years, marriage, sex, and babies have gone together. And here's why, okay? Why marriage? Let's start with marriage, like you said. Why do we have to say we'll accept? Because marriage is not just a contract. See, a contract is a conditional, temporary agreement that can be broken. There's conditions. You don't fulfill your part, I won't fulfill my part. Okay? Well, if marriage is a contract, a prenuptial agreement, quite honestly, is a contract. See, if you don't do this and this and this, then I get this and this and this. That's not a covenant. That's not marriage. That's not a total gift of self. What's a covenant? See, a contract exchanges goods and services, right? For some stipulations, a covenant exchanges persons. See, in a covenant, I am yours and you are mine, the person, not this is yours and this is mine. It's not 50-50. It's 100%. I'm always giving totally of myself. Think about your own marriage. Sometimes your spouse might not be given it all, right? And you make up, and sometimes you're not given it all, right? That's the beauty of a covenant. I look at my wife. I always say to my wife, Veronica, I say, honey, we are on a journey to heaven together. That's what we're doing. Thank you for walking this journey to heaven with me. There's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be bumps. And we're going to try to bring our son Romeo and everyone that will come with us. That's what we're doing. You see, so the reason we say we have to be open to children is because when we are in marriage, there are signs, right? Think about a sign for a minute. What does a sign do? It points to something beyond itself. Okay? When I see this sign, there's a sign that says Fargo 9 miles when I get on the interstate to come to town. If I stopped and hugged, oh, Fargo, yes, I'm here. I'm not a Fargo. It's showing me the way. And once I get to Fargo, I don't need the sign. Marriage is meant to be an image of God's life-giving love. Think about God's love for a minute. Father loving the Son, Son loving the Father back, total gift and reception of each other, that we have a third, the Holy Spirit. Go back to the creed, who proceeds from the
Father and the Son.
There you go. The love of the Father and the Son is the Holy Spirit. Human sexuality is not just biological, Roxanne, it's theological. It is supposed to be an image of God's love. The reason we need to be open to children is because God's love is life-giving. Our love needs to be open to life-giving. Not that every act has to produce a child, but it has to be open to it. And the reason the church has to be open to it is because we are not in total control of our bodies or this act. I did not define marriage. I did not make myself. I didn't make the sexual act. So marriage, sex, and babies have to be together. Why marriage? Because it's a covenant of love where we have sworn that we will be with each other till death do us part, and we will welcome children. Why marriage? Why sex then just for marriage? Because as you mentioned, this is how we get children. This is something that can bring children. Well, I don't want children. Remember, there's two aspects to the sexual act that can't be separated. The bonding, the babies, the procreative, right? When we do that, and I'll talk about some instances later if we can, sex devolves into just a personalistic, pleasure-seeking environment. And finally, babies. Why do babies have to be here? Because that's the natural consequence of marriage and sex, is open to babies. Why does it have to be the way it intended? Think about women's fertility. It's cyclical, right? A woman's fertile by 7, maybe 10 days a month, right? Give or take, right? Okay, cool. If a husband and wife, for serious reasons, say, we probably shouldn't have another child right now, there's two things they can do. They can contracept during the woman's fertile time, right? So, no, I'm just going to do this. But what does that do? That falsifies the sign, Roxanne. Why? Because I promised to give myself fully to you, everything I am. I'm not giving you my fertility. I'm not trusting God to say, okay, you know what, Lord? We can do this. You can do this your way. What's the difference between NFP and contraception? John Paul II says the difference between those two methods are not just the difference in sexuality, but a whole difference in the meaning of the human person. Why? Because as a human person, we are not free to separate the two aspects of the sexual act. If we do, chaos results. Now, what's the other way instead of contracepting? Instead of contracepting, let's say you and Troy, maybe you did this in your marriage. Honey, I don't think it's a good time to have a child right now. I'm fertile right now. And then Troy says, okay, honey, we thought about it, prayed about it. I agree with you. We have 4 kids already and things have been a little crazy around here. How about if we just sit on the couch and I hold you tonight and we watch a movie? You go, oh, Troy, because he shows you he loves you not just for using you as a sexual object. He loves you as a person, and he's willing to abstain from this beautiful sign rather than falsify it for the good of your marriage and the good of your children.
I'm going to throw you a curveball.
Go for it.
Not everyone listening to this believes in God.
Yeah.
How do we present this to them?
Yeah. That's a great question. Let me do this. Let me show this. What I'd like to do, first of all, just let me just say, I know we're maybe going to get this, but theology that John Paul II, right, theology of the Bible. Can I just say a couple things about that?
Mm-hmm.
Because what John Paul is, and this gets right back into not everyone believes in God, and I want to talk about this culture. John Paul II, for those of you that don't know John Paul II, he was born in the 1920s. He died in the early 2000s. He was Pope from 1978 to 2003. Okay, so that gives you here's his situation, right? What did he notice? He noticed three things. Number one, he noticed that men, women, young people, they are really hungry. They're thirsting. They have strong desires that they want to be fulfilled. Perfect. Get it. We all do. Hope that anyone can relate to that. You have strong desires. Number two, it was sometimes hard to know, how do I fulfill these desires? There's so many different ways I can do it. And so many people voices saying, do this, do that. This works. Okay. The third thing then, he said, okay, we have desires. We want desires fulfilled. What we used to do in the olden days is people will lay down the law. Okay, this is it. You do this, you don't do that. And for the most part, many people said yes. I grew up that way, Roxanne. If my folks said something, I didn't need an explanation. So, okay, I'll do that. If a teacher said something, I did it. It would be nice to know the explanation sometimes, but I didn't. Nowadays, Pope John Paul II said, no, this culture is not like that anymore. This culture wants to go from personal experience. So here's what he said. He says, okay, here's what we can do. I'm not going to throw the laws out, okay? The sexuality, we've talked about them, right? But let's say that we don't have God for a minute. Let's talk about personal experience. Let's go back to personal experience in sexuality. Let's go back to the person who's addicted to porn. He's not happy. She's not happy. People are objectified, right? So personal experience says, ask an alcoholic who's not free to take a drink. You see, freedom, quote unquote, yes, I'm free to express my sexuality however I want. Yeah, you can. That's called freedom for indifference. But that's not freedom for flourishing. What's going to cause me to be the best? I'm going to take God out of it. People who are the happiest about their sexuality are three things. They're monogamous, they're open to children, and they're in a stable marriage. By far, one statistic to bear this out. People who are married in a stable marriage, open to children, practicing what we call natural family planning. Notice I haven't even mentioned God. What's natural family planning? It's doing our biological cycles. If we don't think we should have a child, we're not going to contracept, we'll abstain. That brings the husband and wife closer together. It's a shared sacrifice, isn't it? Less than 5% divorce rate. Less than 5%. You people who don't believe in God, let me speak to you directly. We know sex feels good. We know it's a drive. Yes, that's all good. But ask yourself, aren't I made for more than just pleasure? Hasn't my personal experience and the experience of others said, pleasure, if that's all I seek, it gets old. This person gets old. This act gets old. I start looking at other ways. And how do I look at people? It's hard for me not to look at another person as a sexual object. Are you really free? Are you really happy? Are you really at peace? Are you experiencing the joy that you want? Or are you just looking for your next sexual high in some way? That's what John Paul II said. He said, reflect on that. And an honest reflection from all people really will say, yeah, that's really not it. So he says, okay, let's bring your experience then to what John Paul II is talking about. So this is what I would say to you people. Think about it. If you were in a stable marriage where you knew that this person had sworn they'd be with you forever, as long as you both shall live, if this person respected you so much that they never looked at you as a sexual object, but when it was a loving act for both of you, at the proper way and the proper time, you could both enter into it amazingly well, totally giving yourself, totally receiving the other. It's just a beautiful, wonderful act of love. And then to make sure that it doesn't devolve into just the two of you, be open to a third. How do you think that experience? I can tell you, Roxanne, from my personal experience, best sex ever. Because it's an act of love for me and my wife, and we're trusting in God.
How could some pope that's never been married and never had sexual relations come up with the theology of the body?
That is a great question, Roxanne. And of course, a lot of people say, if you haven't experienced, how can you know? That's a good question. John Paul II experienced all of this from the outside. Here's how he did it. One of the great things he did as a young priest, what he would do is he would go on these nature outings with young couples and single people and everything. They would go weekends, and it would be wonderful. I mean, he'd talk to them, he'd interview them, what's important, and they'd talk very frankly about this. You know what he heard? He heard the good, the bad, and the ugly. Do you, wah, wah, wah. Okay, that's a movie reference, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Clint Eastwood, look it up on the internet, people. But anyway, here's what he found out. The three things I told you. They have great desires. There's voices saying, how do I fulfill these desires? Right? He said, let's look at a person. So we'd ask them, what's your personal experience been? And so he'd go through, and they would talk frankly about their sexuality, frankly about their marriage, frankly about their struggles. And he came up with what's called the personalistic norm. Very simple. A person is always to be loved, never to be used. How can a pope know it? Let me ask you this question. I've never been, Roxanne, out to space. But there are people who understand science and understand space that they can fly rockets, right? I've never made a car, but I trust the person that made the car is going to be safe for me, right? Even if I've never had that experience, I know enough to know who I can trust, what I can trust. And that's what John Paul, how can a guy know this? He doesn't have to experience it. Why? Because of objective truth about the human person, always to be loved, never to be used. Now, whether we think or not, okay, this is the key. Think about a time when you've been used. Maybe not sexually, doesn't feel good. When we take sex and we separate those two aspects, love and life, bonding and babies, by fact, objective fact, it is using yourself and using others. It might not feel like at the time. Why? Because it's not immediate and obvious. But look over time. An honest reflection. If that's all it is using. You feel that use. There are times, right, in your marriage, think about it, where my husband doesn't respect me. He's using me as an object. I don't like this. Bingo. You don't have to have a celibate man can see. Pope John Paul II has heard that. He got it. And vice versa, lest I think it's just guys using women. Women can use guys. Women can use guys as a sperm bank, Roxanne. I only want to have a relationship with you when I'm fertile because I want a baby. The rest of the time, I'm saying no. You see, husband and wife can use each other outside of that. That's why the beauty of being open to that. So with a celibate man, he doesn't need to have experienced it, okay? Just like I don't have to have experienced building a car to know it's safe. I don't have to have experience jumping off of a 5-story building to know if I jump off a 5-story building, I will kill myself because gravity is there. Gravity is an objective truth, isn't it? See, I don't defy the law of gravity by jumping off the 5-foot building. I demonstrate it. You see, Pope John Paul II knows, just like gravity is objective truth that affects everyone, so too is this teaching on human sexuality.
Well, that sounds like a good point to pause. Wow. I hope everyone out there is having their mind blown, because I know some of these things, but like the way you are able to convey it, obviously it's something very dear to your heart that you've researched and prayed over and thought about a lot. So I kind of want to get to a little bit of some of the issues in society right now.
Perfect.
That are affected by not abiding by this. So we will come back with more matters of soul importance after this pause. Be right back.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
Welcome back to Matters of Soul Importance. I'm Roxanne Solonin, your host with Tim Mosier, and he is here talking about theology of the body and how it relates to our culture. And one of the things I was thinking about is, obviously, I'm on board here. I mean, this is something I've talked about too, not in the depth that you have, but I helped Ramona Trevino write her story about leaving Planned Parenthood, and we really looked into all of this because it was the contraceptive. She didn't work at an abortion facility that did abortions. She worked at an abortion facility that distributed contraceptives. And she thought she was doing something good. She also had a teenage daughter at the time, and she was watching young people come in and come out and come back in with diseases and come back. And she started piecing things together. Not only that, but she was referring out for abortions. And at some point, she realized her culpability. No, she hadn't administered an abortion, but she was in a facility that was leading people to that, and that grieved her because she didn't agree with abortion. She came from a Mexican American family, and they didn't even go there. So after talking to her for many years, and looking even at Pope Paul VI teaching on Humanae Vitae, which kind of set the blueprint or extrapolated the church's teaching in a way that we could begin to kind of understand, like, if we don't heed this, things are going to kind of fall apart. He was very prophetic. I remember, like, several years ago, I sent a tweet out when it was still Twitter. Now it's X, but I said, contraceptives are the gateway to abortion, and people went crazy. So I want to kind of talk about, well, first you can answer a little bit of that, but springing from there, I want to hear about some of these issues in the culture right now where we're being accused, the church is being accused of getting into people's bedrooms.
Sure.
There are some real things right now. Yesterday, I read an article, someone sent it to me and I put it on Facebook. They're looking into creating children without human beings where they would manufacture eggs and sperm, and we won't even need to have sex anymore. Right. So there we go.
Yeah, good. Well, good. Roxanne, I always like to acknowledge what we acknowledge and what common ground is. So those of you who maybe not believe in God, who think contraception is, of course we should contracept, I want to tell you, on the surface, common wisdom would say, yes, if we want less abortions, if we want more freedom, we should contracept. So I want to tell you, you're not crazy by looking at this and thinking, yeah, that makes sense. But now let's go deeper, right? Let's go deeper beyond this. Let's look at some experience. I'm going to give you just a little bit of good history. Now, here we go. Why is, as Roxanne said, contraception the gateway to abortion? Here's why. Again, it seems on the surface. Number one, until 1930, no Christian church accepted contraception. Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, all the reformers were dead set against it because ever since really the beginning of time, people have known that two things go together, love and life, bonding and babies. Okay, well, let's say you're not religious. Okay, let's talk about what happened in 1930. In 1930, the Anglican Church was the first Christian church that said, well, we should have abstinence if you don't want a child. However, if there's serious motives, other methods may be used, so long as they're careful and restrained, and contraception is never used for motives of luxury or mere convenience. You know what Pandora's box is, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
That was a very small, narrow crack, wasn't it? Now, the first question I would ask everyone is that how contraception is used today? Clearly not. But you might say, well, we were fine just getting with it, just opening up. So we were just, okay, let's go on. What was the reaction to this? Well, of course, religious reaction. I'm going to leave that aside for now. The Washington Post. The Washington Post said this will be the death knell of marriage. This is a secular person, not a religious person, because they could see there's a connection between marriage and sex and babies. And if we contracept, we take it out of there, what's going to happen? Let's look what happens. When we accept contraception, there's always been adultery. There's always been out of wedlock, sex. However, what was one of the main deterrents for adultery? We might have a child. Insert contraception, a quote-unquote relatively safe way to ensure we don't have a child. And what happened? Affairs went way up. What happens when adultery and extramarital affairs go up? relationships between husband and wife are strained. What does that lead to? More divorces. What happens when we have more divorces? Well, now we have children who don't understand and see what a good marriage is. Contraception just puts a premium on pleasure. So now I just is supposed to have pleasure. Is that what's supposed to happen? Let's go back to our three things here, Roxanne: marriage, sex, babies. Contraception severs the connection between sex and babies. But if we sever the connection between sex and babies, as we've seen, leads to marital infidelity, severs the relationship between marriage. And what about children? Well, clearly contraception then is a way that we take and we say, no, we don't want children, and we're going to do it our way. Remember, there's a big difference between the nature of the human person that is fertile for 7 to 10 days a month. The woman is, the guy is 24/7. Fertility machines. Watch how we use it, guys. It's a great responsibility that comes with that. But there's a big difference between doing it the natural, and I won't even say God, nature's way, and this way where we impose our will on it. So you see what happened. Contraception was the case. So the Washington Post said this. Teddy Roosevelt said this is going to be race death. You know, we have a population problem. Do you know that, Roxanne? The population problem is, go over to Japan, go over to Western Europe, where their birth replacement rate is 1.2, 1.3. You know what's happening? The Japanese civilization, as we know it, will be dying out in a few generations. They're not replacing themselves. And what's happening? Look at all the economic unrest. Look at over France a couple of years ago. Remember that? Raised their retirement age. We can't do this. Why not? Because we are aborting and contracepting ourselves out of existence. What's happening? Populations in the West are heavily now leaning on and loaded on the elderly side. What do elderly need? I want to retire. I want health care. I want this. We have very few young people. What are they doing? They're the ones paying into it. What do the young people say to the old people? You are too expensive. We can't afford you. So what does that mean? We have to get rid of you. Euthanasia, assisted suicide. See what happens? Mm-hmm. Roxanne, when we take away, and notice, I'm not even putting God into it. When we take away the natural way of doing things, we have a big problem. So this is what happened, right? So my whole point now, 1930, it wasn't, of course, a religious thing. I don't even have time to get into that, because if you're religious, you kind of know about it. But secular people said, no, this is going to go. Let me fast forward to Alfred Kinsey, 1950s. He's no friend to religion. He said it's a perversion to separate the unitive from procreative. He didn't use unitive and procreative, he says, but if you take away the fertility part to have a child, it's a perversion of the sexual act. Yeah, Alfred Kinsey. Okay.
Father of lies, maybe?
Well,
gets
exactly.
in there?
He does. Now, I can go on if you want, or do you want to ask a question? I would love to lay out.
Yeah, lay it out.
Okay.
Keep going.
Okay. Remember, what's our focus? It's the contraceptive mentality. The contraceptive mentality Pope John Paul II talked about, it's summed up this way. I am in control of the sexual act. I will determine when I have a child my way. If I get a child, but I didn't want, I'm much more likely, because I think I'm in control of the sexual act, I need to be in control of the fruit of the sexual act. Whereas, again, NFP, by the way, NFP, natural family planning, you want to postpone or achieve a pregnancy, over 99% effective in either getting pregnant or postponing a pregnancy. But the contraceptive mentality isn't there. What's this mentality? It's the mentality of, I'm a gift to my wife and she's a gift to me. And we're going to give ourselves freely. And even if we've given ourselves in a time when we thought we would surely be infertile and we have a child, well, we didn't do anything ourselves, a contraceptive act to put in the way of this child. We're much more welcome to be open to this child. You see, the contraceptive mentality. So I want to show you now, Roxanne, here's how the contraceptive mentality is played out, how it's led to abortion, more divorce, same-sex marriage, and gender. Okay, here we go. I'm going to use a series of Supreme Court cases, okay? In 1965, it's called Griswold versus Connecticut. By the way, the manufacture, sale, and distribution of contraceptives was illegal in the United States until 1965. Did you know that? A lot of people don't know that.
We became so enlightened then.
Exactly. Interestingly enough, in the 1800s, it was Protestant legislators that put this in place. 1965. So we said contraception between married couples is okay. The Supreme Court said that under the right to privacy. Now, if you fast forward 3 years, let's take a quick pause in these cases. Okay, remember 1965, 1968, you were talking about Humanae Vitae. That's when Pope Paul VI, put this out. He had 4 predictions. He said, if we accept contraception, number 1, there will be general lowering of morality and women will be looked at as sex objects. Okay? Number 2, he said, women will be looked at as sex objects. Number 3, he said, the government will use contraception forcefully. Go back to Little Sisters of the Poor and the Obama administration. Remember the HHS mandate? You have to cover contraception. You see, because, Roxanne, there's always a key principle in place, a 3-step principle. What becomes quote unquote, all these are in quotes, quote unquote legal becomes quote unquote normal, becomes quote unquote moral. Go back to 1930, it quote unquote legalized contraception. Over the years, all the Protestant religions, Roxanne, have accepted contraception. It's become, quote unquote, normalized in our culture, even to the point, I would say the last 2 decades, again, go back to the HHS mandate, where it's, quote unquote, moral. If you speak out against contraception, not only are you wrong, it's immoral. You have to do this. This is what's been in play. And then the last of Pope Paul VI's predictions was that the human person, people will want to exercise unlimited control over their bodies. Now let's go back to these cases and see how these have all played out. So 1972, okay, 7 years after 1965 that legalized contraception for married couples under the right to privacy, the Supreme Court accepted and recognized contraception for unmarried couples, still a man and a woman. Okay, that's important. Why? Under equal protection. So now we had contraception for married couples, but now we should have contraception for, look what contraception for married couples did. Go back to marriage, sex, and babies. I can be married. I can have sex without a baby. See, it separated that rope. Now we go to 1972. Whoop. Now we don't even have to be married to engage in contraception. Do you see how our nice, neat pigtail or rope, if you're a guy, a 3-strand rope is strong. That's right. It's unraveling. What happened in 1973? Oh, gosh, Roe versus Wade. Because we've accepted the contraceptive mentality, now we have Roe versus Wade. Let's fast forward. I'm going to fast forward to 1986 because this is Bowers versus Hardwick. This is one that talked about can sodomy, right? Same-sex relations, are they legal? And the Supreme Court said no, 5-4. It was close, but they said it has not been accepted. It is not the way we're made, so no, we can't. But keep that in the back of your mind. It's a 5-4 decision. Let's fast forward to 1992, about 20 years after Roe versus Wade. And this is really a kicker, Roxanne. Because what Casey versus Planned Parenthood tried to do, it tried to reverse Roe versus Wade. And this is what the United States Supreme Court said. They said they didn't reverse Roe, and here's why. They said, for 20 years, people have made decisions that affect their lives on the availability of abortion should their contraception fail. The Supreme Court of the United States saying we have to have abortion since we've accepted contraception. Do you see how the contraceptive mentality has led this? Now, you might be sitting there thinking, there's someone out there, well, if I'd use contraception, and if I got pregnant, I would never abort. Good. Thank you. That's great. Well, my point is, look what's happening to the culture. You ask the effects of the culture. The contraceptive mentality has said that we are the Lord of life, not God.
Yeah, and this brings me back to how I started this half of the show was contraception is a gateway to abortion, and people went nuts. But you just said it. I mean, the court said it.
Exactly. And we see it lived out. We see it in lived experience. We see it in the court. We see it in our culture. Look now, fast forward to now. What was the mantra? I'm not going to make it political, but we all know the mantra of this last presidential campaign. Reproductive freedom, reproductive health care, reproductive choice, AKA abortion. It has been remember, it became legal, normal, moral. It started with contraception, now it's abortion. If we speak out against abortion, we're seen as immoral. But it gets worse. Because remember, when we separate marriage, sex, and babies, right? So it leads to more out of wedlock sex, right? Premarital sex, unwanted babies. You see, all this leads to abortion. All of it. Boom, boom, boom. But again, it gets worse. I'm going to fast forward to 2003 now. All these are Supreme Court cases. 2003 is Lawrence versus Texas. It came back and looked at Bowers. is sodomy legal? Two guys were caught in an act of sodomy in Texas, Lawrence versus Texas. And they said, this should be legal. The Supreme Court looked at it and said, yeah, what did it say? It didn't talk about this act being procreative at all. Remember, up until this point, contraception for married, but contraception for unmarried couples too. But you see, if you have contraception for unmarried couples, if you take life out of it, the only focus is pleasure. So the court said, gosh, these acts are intimate and personal. And under equal protection, they said, yes, sodomy is okay. You see, Roxanne, when we separate these two things, any way to satisfy our sexual pleasure, as long as someone's willing to do it with me, becomes okay. That's the logic.
You will be called a bigot.
Of course.
Right now.
Of course.
So can you go there a little bit?
I can. Let me go back to a basic. I don't even think I've said it. What does the church think? There was 3 principles. I was going to state right at the beginning. The church wants you to be amazingly happy, fulfilled, flourishing. We want to be able to fill your amazing, most intimate, deepest desires. Number 1. Number 2, these desires will not be completely fulfilled on earth. Number 3, marriage, sex, and babies have to stay together. So let me talk to those of you that think I'm a bigot now for speaking out against this. I would go back. How are people most satisfied and fulfilled? By letting their urges and things go wild? Or by really looking at each other as a person and the nature of the person? So let's go to homosexual in particular. Okay? Let me go back to my saying. Sex feels good. Absolutely. And you can have, like I said, with another person, whatever it is. Well, let's take a look at the sex between two people of the same gender, right? Okay. Is it an act that is open to others? Is it open to a third? You might think it's an act of love, but I'm asking this, what are you seeking? You're seeking pleasure and you're seeking connection. Okay, great. And remember I talked about that boom, that explosion of things? Okay, you're starting to get that. However, like again, if you're seeking pleasure, and this is the key, it always has to be ramped up. Think about your own sexual life. Think about, I don't want to say perversions because you'll call me a bigot again, but think about the different ways you try to satisfy each other, right? Let me talk to you about my sexual life. Okay, it's kind of boring, but you know what I look at? There's my wife. Is she open to it? Have we laid the groundwork with our relationship? Is it something she's open to? And I don't need more of my wife and I are getting older, Roxanne. We are getting, can I say it this way? We're getting maybe less physical pleasure out of sex than we used to, but we're getting much more out of it as a person because we're giving ourselves as a person, you see? So look what happens. Anytime we separate sex from this, so you want more, this and that, and now it's 3 person, now it's 5 people, now it's this. Okay, now basically what are we saying? The sexual urge controls me. The sexual urge is what I want to satisfy. Number 1, I say, is this the kind of society you want? Okay, think about maybe your children, maybe you have nieces and nephews. Is this the kind of society you want where the sexual urge rules and anything goes? Is that really going to lead us to the happiness and joy we're looking for? An honest reflection on this in your life would say, no. Me and the church, we're not bigots. We simply want you to live a life that is free, full, and flourishing and understanding that we're not made just for this world. See, if we think we're made just for this world, Roxanne, then we'll do what's called utilitarianism. You know what that is? It's the maximum amount of pleasure for the maximum number of people, period. It's the pleasure principle. You see, if you live the pleasure principle without any thought of what's happening afterwards, this is where we go. But ask yourself, is that momentary pleasure, is that really as satisfying as look at these 90-year-old couple that's been together for 50 years and as ugly, quote unquote, as they are physically, they are so in love with each other because they're in love with a person, not an experience.
Can you answer love is love? I'm kind of going in this crazy direction, but I mean, these are things that have been asked of me.
This is good. Absolutely. So let's talk about love is love. Okay. When we say love is love, let me ask you a question. Is it really love is love or is it sex is sex? That's my first question. So those of you who say love is love, right? Okay. So homosexual marriage, heterosexual marriage, by the way, let me just say this. I'm going to do one more court case in here because
Okay,
the court basically went to love is love. Okay, so after 2003, by the way, okay, Antonin Scalia, all right, a wonderful, he was a conservative justice, yes, but he was, I call a constitutionalist, right? He said there's no right to sodomy in the Constitution. But what did he say? He said, if we accept homosexual acts, sodomy, he said, people will come at us for homosexual marriage and we will have no leg to stand on. If we accept this, in principle, we've accepted homosexual quote-unquote marriage. 2013, Windsor, I don't have time to get into it. I'll go 2015, Bostock. No, 2015, Obergefell. Okay, what did the court say? It said, again, these are intimate, personal relationships. They cited Griswold, right? Contraception for married couples. They cited, the 1972 one, Eisenstadt, under equal protection, cited 2003, Lawrence, right? So we have married contraception, unmarried contraception, same-sex acts. They said there's no difference in these. Why? Because they've taken life, the procreation, out of it. See, they said sex is sex. Well, let's talk about what is real love? Let me ask you this. Is love a feeling or is love an action? You might say, well, it's kind of both, but it's more an action. Think about this. Okay, love is love. Love wants what's best for the other person. Love wants what's best for society as a whole. So my question to you is what's best for our society, everyone in exercising individualistic, subjective freedoms, quote unquote, that lead to all sorts of all sorts of sexuality that is so far from just being
perversions.
Okay, well, we can use perversion then, all right. Is that really what love is? Or is love looking at what's best for the other person and society as a whole and saying, you know what? The way we truly love is giving of ourselves, not taking, not defining sex for what I think, but seeing how it's the nature of the person. It's not to be used. It's not to allow people to do whatever. I mean, go back to our freedom. What is real freedom? There's objective truth, Roxanne, and there's subjective truth. Subjective truth is fine for what's the best ice cream flavor, what's the best pizza. But if you say 2 + 2 is 5, it's more than a personal preference. It's chaos. If I say I'm going to define the rules of basketball and I can flagrant foul, I can punch someone, there's chaos. If we say I'm going to say that red light means go, there's chaos. My friends, when you take away objective truth, and what John Paul II said, he said it many minutes ago, that's not true freedom. It devolves into chaos and mayhem.
I see you laying out two visions. One is the church over here, and then there's this, like the world, the Supreme Court deciding. And yeah, it's so we're over here now.
Yeah,
on the side with the world kind of going logically.
That's right.
But in the wrong direction, in a direction that is hurting us. And I will say that emphatically.
Yeah.
For my own life, we contracepted initially. Troy wasn't Catholic, and I thought there's no way he's going to buy into this. I can't make my husband go there. Mm-hmm. I kind of had a reversion in the middle of that and came to understand it. And after I understood that, I understood all of the teachings that I'd had struggles with. It opened up like a freedom to me to completely follow the church and see it not as a heavy-handed parent, but as a father who loved, as a church who loved. So it truly is a beautiful vision, but it depends on which perspective you're looking at it from, right?
Exactly. And John Paul said, let's zone in on this, Roxanne. Let's zone in your personal experience, okay? Because John Paul II exactly says this. He says, it's personal experience. It's called phenomenology, always verified by the objective law. So let me ask you this question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but I'm asking it. You were contracepting for a while with Troy, you admitted that, and then not. What is your lived experience about yours and Troy's relationship and in your sexuality from contracepting to now, as you went through to seeing the beauty and truth of the human person? I will
tell you that I maybe didn't see it until we were on the other side of our childbearing years.
That's fine.
And I realized, oh my heavens, we wouldn't have these children. So for me, it was like these lives that we love so much wouldn't be here. They wouldn't have been here if we would have gone with the world. We had our girl and our boy.
Yeah.
People thought we were crazy to think about a third. And then we lost that baby. And then we were like, you know what? Nuh-uh. Not going to listen to the world anymore. We had a breakthrough because of a miscarriage. And at that time, we were embracing NFP too. And it was scary at times, you know? But anyway.
This is true. This is beautiful.
The embodiment of our decision when we got to the other side of that. And now we look back and it's like our whole lives are about like praying for our children and continuing to love them. And we have grown closer because of we just love our children.
Yes.
And I can't imagine life without them. So to us, it's very real.
Exactly. And I would ask everyone out there, Roxanne's is one of these experiences. Look at this personal experience. Talk to someone. You mentioned, Roxanne, it was scary. Let's be honest. It is scary. Why is it scary? Because we are giving up total control. One of the basic hallmarks of the human person, Roxanne, and I don't think anyone can deny this, we have infinite dignity, but we have limited freedom. I can't run through a red light. I can't yell fire in a crowded theater. I do not have absolute total individual freedom over everything, do I? It's scary because it's natural. It's natural to want to have control. Everyone out there, you want control? Yes, I want control. Okay? We all want control. The question is, what is legitimate control? And in what way then, if I exercise control, am I harming myself and harming others? Go back to red light. I'm harming myself. I'm putting myself at risk. I'm putting others at risk. So too with contraception, we're putting ourselves at risk because we look at each other and act as we are using each other. We're putting society at risk because I've just laid out the Supreme Court cases. When we accept the contraceptive mentality, logically follows abortion, logically follows same-sex acts or any expression of sexuality, logically follows same-sex marriage, logically follows, may I just quick spike about gender for a second, okay? Now I'll go to Bostock 2020. What do we basically say? Gender, okay, refers to basically what you want to define it as. Pope Benedict the 16th, he called this out. He said, here's what's going to happen, he says. Follow it logically. We are going to be rejecting God. And okay, so if you don't believe in God, rejecting your nature. We are made male or female. You might say, well, Tim, what about intersex, this and that? Okay, yes. Even like Klinefelter syndrome, for instance, you are still male or female, but you just may have some more characteristics of the other sex. We are male or female. Pope Benedict says the whole transgender thing, we're denying the nature of who we are. And if you're a religious person, you're denying the gift that God gave you. We can't possibly be at peace and flourish and be in love if we are rejecting our very nature, which is male or female, which is what God gave us. So what do? You might say, but Tim, come on, I'm transitioning. Here's what we do. I coached volleyball, as I told you, Roxanne, for over 30 years. I had several players who were anorexic. You know what they thought? I'm fat. Tim, I'm fat. And I'm watching them get thinner and thinner. Of course, I got them professional help, but here's the point. I didn't say, yeah, you're fat. That's your nature. That's what's good for you. No, I helped bring their mental state, which needed some help, into line with the truth of their body and their person. That's what we do with people who are experiencing gender dysphoria. Yes, it's real. It is real. I hear you. You are suffering greatly. My question is this. Does it make more sense to just totally mutilate your body? And remember, every single cell in your body is either male or female. So even if I remove my sexual organs or have someone remove my sexual organs, Roxanne, guess what? I'm still a man. I just don't have the genitals of a man. So the question is, are you going to be happier bringing your mind, helping? And let's help. Yes, you need help. And I'm not getting on you. I'm not saying you're crazy. No, you are searching for love. You're searching for peace. You're searching for identity, fulfillment. Who am I? You're searching. And I care about you. I care about you so much. Now let's get the help you need so your mind can come into conformity with the truth of the body.
Thank you, Tim. You are just filled with the Holy Spirit. And I pray that someone out there who believes that the church is mean and getting in the wrong places and interrupting things, and that we're bigoted if we go with that vision, I pray that maybe one or two people will begin, just even through your passion, to have a different thought and maybe look into this a little bit more. I do hope we can do a part 2 on this. So thankfully you're right in town here. So It's great. But thank you for your time and enlightening us. And I'm excited to share this with others. So thank you, Tim.
Yeah. Thank you, Roxanne, for what you do and the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. God bless.
God bless you.
Does the church hate sex? As Tim emphasized, the church loves sex so much that it ardently guards it to protect those who engage in this life-giving act from use and abuse. The church reveres sexual intimacy because this is precisely God's plan for introducing new souls to the world and bringing us together in love, His delight. Because we only scratched the surface today, I am going to have Tim back on for part 2. To conclude today, Tim wanted to share a song he wrote based on his knowledge of the church's teaching on human flourishing. So I'll let Tim explain the song to lead us into the heart of it. In our next episode, we'll dive even more deeply into the many topics touched by the church's wisdom on this subject: surrogacy, IVF, and much more. Until then, don't lose sight of the light.
The theology of the body we've been studying for many times. My wife and I went out to Pennsylvania for the first couple classes. We actually wrote this in 2012. There's 2 big questions theology of the body asks. Who am I? And how should I live? We all ask these deep questions, don't we? Who am I? Where am I from? Where am I going? How should I live? Every single person asks that, whether you believe in God or not. John Paul II, he knew he asked these questions. He said, let's start here. Because everyone asks these questions. All right? So the song goes like this. So I was going through these John Paul II, right? All these principles. It's like, so it starts like this. Who am I and how should I live? Those 2 basic questions. Now, a lot of this is going to be religious, but bear with me. I come before you with nothing to give. In other words, I got nothing. I'm nobody. Have you ever been in the throes of, maybe it's clinical depression, maybe it's just, I don't know. I've got nothing. Okay? Empty and broken. Lost in my sin. How can I win? The first few lines set it up. We've all been there, haven't we? Whether you think it's sin or not, you've been in that place. For far too long, I've kept this inside, right? Tried to stuff it, push it in. These wounds are so deep, I just want to hide. Who would love me if they knew the real me? How can you love me? How can it be? You died for me. You see, everyone thinks this. And here's the chorus. This is my body, Jesus says, given for you. This is my blood. Let it wash you anew. Deep in my heart, get lost in my flood. This is my body. This is my love. You see, Jesus gave his body for us, whether you realize or not. You're searching for God. Your end is meant to be with God. Second verse. I know you're with me now. You're starting to trust. I'm not alone. Your grace is sufficient as Mary has shown. Mary is the perfect embodiment, Roxanne, of the theology of the body. She said yes to God. It's beautiful. So going back to the song, I give you permission. I give you my heart. Where do we start? Getting back to your point, Roxanne, of control. Say, Lord, okay, I'm going to give you control. Think about even this 12-step program. What's the first thing? I admit that I am not in control. I can't do this. Yes, give me up control. Back to the song. From the beginning, marriage the plan. Think of Adam and Eve. Foretaste of heaven for woman and man. Throughout the whole Bible, throughout all eternity, marriage is that one icon of the love of God, right? That beautiful love. Eternal banquet, back to the text. Eternal banquet, nuptial bride, you will provide. If you know the Bible, you know that the marriage supper of the Lamb, the last part of Revelation. Then it's the chorus again. This is my body given for you. This is my blood. Let it wash you anew. Deep in my heart, get lost in my flood. This is my body. This is my love. Then there's a bridge. Focuses on marriage. Listen to this. Because one key tenet of theology of the body says the body and it alone can make visible the love of God. Okay? Because God doesn't have a body, except Jesus does, because Jesus came in. Pope John Paul II says the theology of the body came through the front door, but it's through our bodies that we make God present. So listen to what this says about marriage. The mystery once hidden from our eyes, that's God. The mystery of the bridegroom and the bride. Jesus is the bridegroom, the church is the bride. See? The next one, the mystery revealed in your flesh, in Jesus' flesh. Why? In his total gift of self. The last line is now, the mystery our bodies now express. Married love, yes, but think of a Mother Teresa. You don't have to be married to express this life-giving love, right? Married, single, whatever it is. You see, this mystery is revealed by our bodies. So finally, we do the chorus again, and then, come live in me. Come set me free. See, what's this person saying? Okay, Lord, yes, come live in me. I want this. I want this joy, this peace that comes from giving control to you and loving through my body. So come live in me, come set me free. Then you live in me. You've set me free. You've set me free. This is a journey from someone who is empty and broken and doesn't know what's going on to at peace and is free because they've accepted who they are and who God made them to be and trusts in God and his saving power to set them free.
Who am I and how should I live? I come before you with nothing to give, empty and broken, lost in my sin. How can I win? For far too long I've kept this inside. These wounds are so deep that I just want to hide. How can you love me? How can it be? You died for me. This is my body given for you. This is my blood, let it wash you anew. Deep in my heart, get lost in my flood. This is my body. This is my love. I know you're with me, I'm not alone. Your grace is sufficient as Mary has shown. I give you permission, I give you my heart. Where do we start? From the beginning, marriage the plan, foretaste of heaven for woman and man, eternal banquet, nuptial bride, you will provide. This is my body given for you. This is my blood, let it wash you anew. Deep in my heart, get lost in my flood. This is my body. The mystery once hidden from our eyes. The mystery of the bridegroom and the bride. The mystery revealed in your flesh. The mystery our bodies now express. This is my body given for you. This is my blood, let it wash you anew. Deep in my heart, get lost in my flood. This is my body. This is my body given for you. This is my blood, let it wash you anew. Deep in my heart, get lost in my flood.